This year, we made the decision to sunset our most popular product. And I thought I'd come and tell you all the story about why we made this decision, or why I made this decision. But first up, I want a show of hands. Has anybody worked at a company where you've replaced your most popular product with something that's slightly different? I see a couple of hands going up. Okay, how many of you have worked at a company where you've rewritten your most popular product? So let's say a non-trivial product, a couple of 100,000 lines of code or something. Yeah, quite a few hands. Okay, of you two groups, put your hands up if this went well. What, nobody? Yeah, I've got the battle scars from doing this before in my previous company, and I promised I'd never do it again, but we did. So I'm going to tell the story. And I'm going to tell the story right from, I suppose, when I started web scraping first, or at least first doing it at scale, what I like to call the good old days. So this was back in 2007, when I was working for a startup. I had a few developers go write some scripts in Python. And, you know, everybody, well, it was a mess, right? It's kind of what you'd expect. Inconsistent error handling, one script would break and it would fall over completely. Retry policies, throttling, character encoding detection, all that stuff. It was all very messy. So I thought, okay, let's build a framework. Let's make a nice, simple API. Developers just need to do the bare minimum they need to do on a per website basis. And that's why I wrote Scrapy. And we scaled it up. We did 4,000 e-commerce websites in about 2 years with my team. And this worked great. But the interesting thing and why I bring this up is that we didn't use any proxies. Not a single one for 4,000 e-commerce websites. So that's why we call it the good old days. Now, in 2010, when we founded Zeit, this was still our web scraping stack, still very nice and simple. But the following year was when we started encountering bans. Now, again, this was mostly from an e-commerce web scraping. We typically, at that stage, the first ones, companies would, for example, they might ban all of our hosting center because somebody else had been abusive crawling from there. We were hosting an EC2, so it was, or an AWS, so it was very common that all of AWS would get banned. But over the next, really over the next year, this started getting worse. We started getting more bans, so we bought some proxies. And this was our web scraping stack then. This really only worked well for us for about a year. Because what started to happen was, okay, sometimes we'd buy a pool of proxies for the company, but with many different web scrapers running, many different spiders, people would get those IPs dirty. It was very hard to control what was happening, very hard to share them between different web crawls. It was very inefficient. So when we do work for customers, right, we used to provide data. We still do. Often we'd get long delays. You know, we'd have to change IPs, swap them. It was hard to manage. It was hard to control. So we thought, okay. So I thought, okay, I'm going to solve this. So I wrote Smart Proxy Manager, or crawl errors, we called it back in the day. This was a proxy manager. It could contain, you know, it managed a pool of hundreds of thousands of IPs. It would keep them clean, throttle requests, so nobody could crawl at an abusive rate, or do something too dumb and get things blocked. Good isolation between different users, so people couldn't interfere with each other. And that worked pretty well for quite some time. Nice and simple, a magic bullet. We didn't have any problems. We could just scrape whatever we wanted, or, well, nearly scrape whatever we wanted. And that was good. But over time, of course, we ran into some problems. I think you can all guess that this is not what our current web scraping stack looks like. A couple of years later, we had to start introducing other types of proxies. Smart Proxy Manager Residential, you know, for residential IPs. Now, this is a very simple version of what it looks like nowadays. But yeah, look, actually, Isaac Coleman, who's up next, will go into a bit more detail around all this stuff and the transition, or what's been happening with data center versus residential. There's a lot more detail there, and it's changed recently. But for us at this time, this worked for a little while, but of course, what started happening was that a lot of companies started targeting the browser layer. So they'd have some JavaScript or something that would run in the web browser, and you wouldn't be able to scrape unless you had a browser. So we started first with open source web browsers, and we started customizing them, but eventually we ran into problems. We even had our own open source web scraping API to a web browser, but it started getting blocked too often and it was too unreliable. So we we made a new product. I talked about it a couple of years ago at this event, our smart browser. And look, that worked pretty well, but the problem with this, I mean, it still works well, this stack, but the problem with it is it's very difficult to know what to use. Our own developers who were producing, doing web crawling, it's hard to know which one to use to start. We'd have a lot of knowledge internally, so people could ask on Slack, hey, what works for this website? What settings? What combination? But if we needed to move then, if we got some bans or something, it's code changes to move from a proxy to a web browser API. So this was starting to get a bit of a pain, become a bit more of a maintenance burden. And often we couldn't use them well together. But this was for our own internal use, right? But what do we actually tell customers to use? And this is what my team were telling me. Hey, Shane, how can we, this stuff you've invented, it's like really complicated, right? We can't tell people what to use for any given website. Why did you do this? Why did you invent something so complicated? Like, well, it's not our fault. This is actually a fairly complicated solution space. Nowadays, if you just want some data from the web and you're thinking, okay, I might buy it or I might build it, you've got a lot of choices. From the kind of data extraction side, you can buy the data, you can buy code, you can use different approaches to web data extraction. You've got multiple choices for browsers and proxies as well. And it's very hard to know which one to use when, unless you're really into this stuff, unless you're, well, pretty much an expert. Or, you need to ask other people. And what typically happens is there's an awful lot of trial and error. I started thinking, okay, well, what can we do to solve this? And like any good computer scientist, I thought, hey, look, we can introduce another layer of abstraction to try and solve this problem. So we thought, okay, we'll wrap an API around the whole thing and bake our own best practices into it. And that's what we've built. We built this Zide API, which can access any website using kind of an automated mechanism to use the right combination of tools for each website. So maybe you can access anything, but you use the most efficient set of resources. So we can do it at a reasonable cost. So this now allows us to use a single solution for all of our web scraping. Now, the controversial part as well is that it is a different API. So this is why it's also quite different to our existing approach. It's not a proxy API anymore. I mean, in hindsight, proxy APIs were awesome because it's really easy to integrate with, especially early on. But nowadays, more people have client libraries, more people, and it's worth it to have the richer functionality, which means you can pass more structured data, you can get more data back, we can provide rich information to our users, and in particular, when there's a browser behind it, you want to be able to interact with that browser, and you just can't do that through a proxy API. So in order to not have to rewrite code or make changes, we've gone with a HTTP API. However, as I was explaining this morning, you don't need to rewrite your code. We're releasing a proxy API for backwards compatibility as well. That's to come. So this is what we've built, the API to the internet. It's not just going to be about avoiding bans, but it's the foundation upon which we can build other stuff. And we released this a while ago. I think the Web Scraping Club, if you're not subscribed to the Substack, you should be. It's a fantastic blog. This was the first one to review it, and it got quite positive reviews. So we were really happy, especially when it was super early release. We didn't have that time to bed in yet, and we also did Proxyway benchmark. Now, it's kind of interesting to hear, obviously we compared well against success rate, response times, cost, all that stuff, but this was being compared against maybe the onlocker or onblocker solutions, so this kind of real premium end, most expensive solution. But the difference, I suppose, in what we built and how I wanted it to be used was that it's a single tool for everything. It's meant to be this tool that can crawl any website or access any website, but you can use it for the easier use cases as well, where you might be playing around with different kinds of proxies, because that's actually the problem we set out to solve. Sorry. So in order to do that, we had to have a different pricing model as well. So this is another way it varies from what we had before. We have a tiered-based pricing. So depending on what we need to use to access the website, the cost is going to be different. We assigned each website to different tiers. So if it needs a lot of compute, browser rendering, and other things, it costs a bit more than if it needs very little. But we've kept, since we launched it actually all year, we've kept the pricing for any given website quite stable. It doesn't move between tiers very often. Typically what we've done is when a website does need some more resources, our engineers will come in and try and optimize it so that we can maintain kind of a competitive or a reasonable pricing. I think once this year we've had a website where we haven't been able to do that. We absorbed the costs when this happens, and we gave our customers plenty of warning before we got back to them with a change in price. But it's rare, and so far so good. This is working for us. We built pricing calculators, so you can type in any website and see how much it's going to cost, apply your discount. We built toscrape.com because it loves being scraped. Scraping Zeit is expensive. Please don't do it. And a UI where you can try it all out. And look, this is showing as well, I guess, beyond just an API that can access any website. This is showing some of our more advanced features. You can take screenshots. We've got our our data extraction for different data types. So this is like a really good leading machine learning-based data extraction, but built on top of this kind of premium solution for accessing any website as well. So it's combining really strong ban handling with really strong data extraction. And also we inherit all the other features, right? So we've now put work into doing machine learning extraction without needing browser rendering, just extracting off the raw HTTP. So it's, you can do it much cheaper if you want to, or you can interact with the browser, do other things, and run extraction. So all of this works pretty well together as a single API. So that's kind of what we built. That's the reasons why we made this transition, and why you can still see Smart Proxy Manager on our website, but it's coming off pretty soon. And we have a backwards compatible API. We'll obviously keep supporting it though for our customers for quite some time. But you'll hear a lot today about AI. You'll hear a lot about the future, but it's being built around APIs like this, and this is where we're going from here. So thank you, everybody. That's my talk. That's the story. If you have any questions, I think you might be able to ask them on Slido.
Yeah. Hi, all. I'm Kevin. I'm CTO for Zeit. I'm in the lucky position today that I get an opportunity to ask hard questions of my boss. Yeah. And he has to answer them. So I don't know if we have any Slido questions. They were supposed to be put up, but you mentioned AI, Shane, and we're talking about the future. How are you seeing that in the context of everything that we've just, you've just kind of gone through the evolution? How do you think it's going to play out in the next, period?
Yeah, so for in the next period, we've already got, I suppose, a traditional AI that's being used quite well. What we're doing now, as you're aware of, Kevin, is that we're working a lot on the latest generation of large language models to apply this to be able to customize it. Because to take from a reasonable AI extraction, which is what we have now, to something that's generally useful in more use cases, we needed two things. We needed to make sure we could get the accuracy up really high, and we needed to make sure we could customize it for different customers' needs. So those are the two problems. We'll be talking about them later today, that we've gone pretty hard in tackling both. Correcting this, having this human in the loop to be able to give hints to the AI to get that accuracy up to 100%. That's one problem we've been working on. And then the second one is to be able to add extra attributes or customize it. So they're the two missing pieces. I think we've made good progress on both of them. So I look forward to some of those talks. And yeah, of course, I think all of our customers will say to us, it's no good if you're spending all your time in ban handling. You won't get to the data extraction part. But I think we've got a reasonable solution for that now at the moment as well.
Okay, thanks, Shane. So Hendrik has a question. Is the cost estimator for Zeit API already available?
It is, yeah. You have to log in to use it, but it's there.
I think one of the interesting things, with this whole ecosystem, and maybe you could kind of expand on it, because you obviously created the original of the species, in Scrapey, but the developer tool ecosystem, what's your thoughts on how you see that evolving in the next while?
So we've got it's getting more and more interesting. We've been working on a IDE. We've been working on additional tools for Scrapey developers. So it's getting more sophisticated. Like, the more we host solutions behind the cloud, the more you need, I suppose, different tools and ways to access them. So that's been a focus for us, is to bring more to the developer productivity. When we launch a new tool like Zeit API as well, you don't have all the same tooling you might have had for your old ecosystem and built around proxies. So we're we're working to build that out as well. Yeah, and we put more of a focus on, we're also using Scrapey as a customization mechanism now as well for all the stuff that's hosted in the cloud. So we've been doing a bit more on Scrapey now, and we will continue to do a bit more than we have in the last maybe couple of years.
Okay, so a couple of questions, and we do have a little bit of time. So, from VJ, what are the type of fingerprinting algorithms used by bot defender services?
I don't know. I'm not the right person to answer that. I think have we got a talk on anti-banning today? I'm not sure.
A little bit.
A little bit, yeah. Like one of those developers would be I think better place to talk about the latest.
Yeah, and I think the second question is probably more specific on the Zeit API, the data that we're able to extract. You want to give maybe a little bit of insight into that, Shane?
Yeah, we do. We have product and news. Real estate, I'm not sure that's public yet. No. I don't think it's public yet, but we've got jobs. We were also seeing things like products as well as a nice broad one, but what we're doing is we're doing like product listings as well and different ways that you can extract complete product data. What we're also doing, I suppose, a lot now with this too is being able to extract. Previously our machine learning extraction would use the page layout as well as the text, but we also have a version now that just uses the text, and we've been working on getting the accuracy up. So that means it's much more cost effective. So it really opens up this new use case of using AI plus coding to do it at scale.
The question on LLMs, Constantine, our head of data science, is going to give a talk exactly on this topic.
Yeah. That'll be answered really well later.
Yeah, you can ask Constantine all the hard questions. He's just over there.
Yeah.
Okay. When will Smart Proxy Manager be deprecated?
Yeah, so we'll stop selling it to new customers in the coming weeks. I think as soon as our backwards compatible proxy API is released. So I think we're a couple of weeks out. Like, it's up and working. We're using it internally. We just want to get it completely feature complete with the Smart Proxy Manager API. But it's nearly there. So in the coming weeks, we'll shift completely to Zeit API.
And that's just for new customers?
Just for new customers. Of course, we have a lot of enterprise customers. We're not going to turn this off anytime soon. And this will be years.
And I think this will be last question, extracting airline pricing data. I don't know, we don't really do it.
I think we can, but we don't do as much airline pricing data.
Okay, well, thank you, Shane.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everybody.